An original podcast from podlatino.com.
There's a voice that doesn't ask for permission. It arrives without warning, takes the air out of the room, compresses it, bends it, and releases it transformed into something that hurts even before anyone has named the wound. There's no introduction, no courtesy, just that opening that seems to come from somewhere deep and far away at the same time. A guitar begins to move, not as background, but as a presence that pushes from behind, that insists, that builds tension instead of resolving it. Then the Palmers arrive, and they're not decorating anything, they're marking time with the same seriousness you'd use to mark a boundary. And then the voice returns, higher, more broken, more true. That is flamenco before any explanation, a way of saying what burns inside when ordinary words are not enough. Understanding where that intensity comes from means looking toward the south of Spain, toward Andalusia, toward a region that for centuries was a place of encounter and also of tension between very different cultures. Flamenco was not invented by a single community, and it didn't emerge from a single tradition. It formed slowly, the way things that truly last always do, through accumulation, through friction, through necessity. For centuries, that territory was home to Arabs, Jews, Roma, and Spaniards of different origins. Each brought with them a way of understanding the voice, the rhythm, the emotion, the relationship between the body and music. And even though those communities didn't always mix peacefully, their forms of expression kept finding each other, colliding and transforming one another over time. The Roma people hold a central place in that story. They arrived on the Iberian Peninsula in the 15th century, carrying with them musical traditions that had travelled a long way, with roots in northern India, filtered through Persia, Egypt, and the Balkans. That music was not decorative. It was a language that held together the identity of a community living on the margins, a community that was persecuted, that needed a way to preserve something of its own in a society that didn't always acknowledge them. When that expression met the singing styles of southern Andalusia, with the melodic modes left behind by centuries of Arab presence and the deep liturgical traditions of Jewish song, something new began to take shape. It wasn't a planned fusion. It was a synthesis that happened in the streets, in the taverns, in homes, in courtyards, in the spaces where people gathered to sing what couldn't be said any other way. The cante is the core, not melody understood as something beautiful, but the voice understood as an instrument of truth. There is a concept in flamenco that captures that idea better than any formal definition. Duende. Federico Garcia Lorca described it as a dark force that rises from the earth and cannot be manufactured. Duende is not technique. It's what happens when a singer reaches a point of such complete surrender that the emotion stops being performed and becomes real. There are flamenco voices that sound cracked, rough, almost damaged, and that texture is not a flaw. It's a scar the voice carries from having held too much. Flamenco doesn't look for the perfect voice, it looks for the honest one. The palos of flamenco, which is the name given to the different styles within the genre, each carry their own emotional temperature. Cante jondo, which in Old Spanish means deep song, is the darkest, the most stripped down. The soleá carries solitude and weight. The seguiria is pure lament, almost ritual. The bulería has urgency and fire. The rumba has joy and movement. Each palo has its own rules of compass, its own way of breathing, its own place on the emotional scale. And yet all of them share something, the idea that music is not there to entertain from a distance, but to reach inside. The flamenco guitar is not the classical guitar. It has a different construction, with lighter woods that produce a drier, more percussive sound. And its role is not simply to accompany the voice, it's to dialogue with it, to anticipate it, to respond to it, to create tension around it. The flamenco guitarist works with falsetas, which are original melodic phrases, but also with rasguados, strikes, and silences. The guitar can build anticipation with 3 repeated notes, or open a space of silence that means more than any ornament. Nothing in that sound is accidental. Everything is there because it belongs. The body speaks in flamenco too, and not as an illustration of what the voice is saying, but as part of the same language. Flamenco dance is one of the most complex and physically demanding forms of bodily expression that exists. The feet strike the floor with rhythmic precision that builds in layers, dialoguing with the guitar, responding to the cante. The hands move with a calculated slowness that contrasts with the urgency of the feet. The posture, the gaze, the tension in the arms, all of it communicates. And it's not choreography in the sense of fixed steps. There is a structure, but inside that structure there is room for improvisation, for the present moment, for what emerges right then and cannot be repeated exactly the same way twice. The palmas, which may seem like the simplest element, are actually quite sophisticated. There are closed palmas and open palmas, palmas that mark the main beat, and palmas that push against it, creating a polyrhythmic tension that keeps the music alive and in motion. The palmas are not the background, they are part of the conversation. Everything in flamenco is a conversation. The cante speaks to the guitar speaks to the dance speaks to the compas, and the compas speaks to everyone at once. For a long time, flamenco was looked down on by parts of Spanish society that saw it as a marginal expression, something belonging to poor Roma people, noise without form. It wasn't until the late 19th century that it began to be recognized as an art form of real value, and the cafés cantantes of Seville and Madrid were the first stages where flamenco was presented to audiences who came specifically to listen. That recognition had complex consequences. On one hand, it gave legitimacy to an expression that had until then survived on the margins. On the other, it began to separate flamenco from its original context to turn it into a spectacle, and that tension between authenticity and performance still exists today. In the 20th century, flamenco went through enormous transformations. Guitarists arrived who pushed the technical possibilities of the instrument to limits no one had imagined. Dancers redefined the form with a choreographic depth that was entirely new, and singers challenged the boundaries of the genre without abandoning its core. Then came the crossings. Flamenco entered into dialogue with jazz, with classical music, with rock, with electronic music. Those crossings sparked controversy, as they always do when something alive decides to move. But they also produced work that proved flamenco could transform without becoming unrecognizable. Its identity was never in formal purity, it was in expressive intensity. And that intensity survived every experiment. Today, flamenco has a presence on almost every continent. There are flamenco schools in Japan, in the United States, in Argentina, in France. There are artists who were born far from Andalusia and who nevertheless play or dance with a deep understanding of what is at stake. That says something important about the nature of this language, that even though it has very specific roots, what it transmits is universal enough to cross borders without translation. Pain, pride, memory, resistance, the kind of truth that can't be said with polite words. None of those things need a passport. Flamenco matters because it is proof of what music can do when it refuses to stay on the surface. It matters because it comes from a history of marginalization and survived not in spite of that history, but through it, turning weight into form and wounds into language. It matters because in a world where music increasingly seeks to be easy, immediate, and consumable, flamenco insists on being difficult, deep, and demanding, both for the people who make it and for the people who listen. And perhaps most importantly, it matters because when a flamenco voice finds its duende on the right stage, with the right guitar and the right silence surrounding it, something in the listener's body recognizes it, even without knowing why. as if there were a memory older than personal memory, and Flamenco knew exactly how to reach it.